Believe it or not, I don't have all the answers. And because of that, I like to have this interaction with everybody, because the best practices is really what we should be taking away out of this. I was thinking about this session, and I was thinking 22 years ago when I was with Motorola, they started their gay group. That's what they called it at the time. And boy, have we come a long way, right? And, so as an HR professional, and I was a director at the time, I had a lot of employees that would come to me and say, I want to participate in this, and is there damage to it? And, it's scary, right? Because it's sort of something new, and it's like, how am I going to be perceived? And I had a couple of situations. I want to share them just to sort of level set. One is that we're all hired into an organization to produce and perform for certain functions. And people sometimes forget that once they're in, because they get so wrapped up on a passion of the, being Pride group and doing the Pride activities nationally or locally. And when it comes time for performance review, sometimes what happens, unfortunate, is that people don't remember your day job. They remember all the other stuff you were doing around the Pride group. And there's got to be a balance, right? And I saw people who really did themselves a little bit of a disservice because they weren't able to balance. But a little bit of coaching goes a long way. So one of the things I want to make sure that we address is, talking about the ERG group, what's the charter? And does that incorporate something around performance and talent management for the individual participant, right? Because if your charter doesn't include why you're working in an organization, there may be a little bit of a mismatch. So when it comes time for performance review, what happens again is that the robust dialogue that should be taking place about individual contributors or their contributions at large is really diminished. So some of the things I want to talk about, and if there's some best practices, please jump in. But I always tell people it's great to have data, because I've been too many performance sessions where I, as an HR leader, had to lead that session with the business leaders. And a lot of times what happens is that everybody has, it's almost like a horse race, right? When you're talking about performance in a group setting, everybody's got their favorite employee. And it's an opportunity for people to share their experience with all these employees. And what happens oftentimes is that some of it becomes a little bit negative, only because they'll say, what, Sally Sue over there was brought in to be an accountant, and she spends so much time on the road going to these activities that I don't think is a value add. So the mismatches oftentimes is that the remit of the charter of that group is not in alignment with management. So number one, get your alignment, because if without that, people may go off course. And then the other part of it is the making sure that you have quarterly minimum with your executive sponsor. If you don't have an executive sponsor, best to get one. And typically it's going to be a C-suite person, right? And if you can't accomplish that, you may want to look into other options and get support so that you do get that alignment. And the reason you need that support is because oftentimes there's another way to get noticed within the organization through the ERG. And it's not just a Pride ERG, it could be any one of them. And it's really, in this environment that we're in, it's about talent management, right? I'm sure all of you are like telling people about the jobs you have open in your organization. And I know that the LGBT Chamber has a job posting, and it's pretty popular. So the one way to add value, again, is to get your participants to find out, how do we support this initiative, because it's very valuable. And if we can get more people from our ERG group involved and recruited, the much better for us. And not only that, but management looks at it as well. This is a value add. This group is doing really well. And so when that discussion for performance comes, it's never that they're doing all their focus on the outside activities, but they're doing focus on talent management activities, which helps our organization. So those are just some of the ways. I want to open it up too. Does anybody have other examples so far?
I'll speak.
That's working for you.
I'm Adam Christensen. I lead learning and development at Oak Street Health. And we're a younger company, meaning we're around 8 years old, I think. So our, what we call people resource groups are fairly new. I co-lead the group, and something that we're trying to now kind of encourage our people operations team to build into talent development and talent management is incorporating, I guess, corporate social responsibility as a part of the promotional like to receive a promotion, demonstrating some kind of corporate social responsibility, if that's internal mentoring programs or organizing volunteer activities, to sort of encourage that the work isn't all falling on the people who are leading work around what we call the PRGs or ERGs. So I'm curious of your thoughts on that, how to sort of, if you have experience of proposing that and integrating that into kind of expectations for promotion so that it sort of becomes common or a norm that responsibility is shared.
Yeah, so I think it's sort of the rules of the road when it comes to performance management, right? And so rules of the road would be, here are the components that we do performance reviews on. And typically maybe a 10% or 20% would be about maybe outside activities, if you will, or personal development, right? Because that's sort of in the same bucket. Again, what's the charter and how is that formalized, to your point, right? So getting that through your sponsor, whether it's, you know, an executive or, you know, one of the managers, to make sure that that's understood and appreciated. Otherwise, it's not going to work so well, right? Because there's too many surprises at the end. You know, one of the things I just saw from Lisa Kelly, she's at the Nature Conservatives, and she's talking about a role fellowship to protect up to 25% of their time for ERG activities, right? So it's a stated. And Lisa, if you can add more to that, I think that's what we're talking about, right?
Yes, we have an internal fellowship program called the CODA Fellowship Program, where staff can do a stretch assignment, perhaps with a different business unit or in a different functional area for anywhere from 6 months to up to 3 years. And our ERG leadership positions, not membership, but leadership. So if you're a co-lead or you're on a steering committee, those roles can be codified as formal fellowships. Typically, it's done for a year at a time. A steering committee member would typically protect about 10% of their time for that role, and a leader would protect about 25% of their time. And so, similar to our annual performance review process, almost like a contract is drafted with the supervisor of the ERGs, the individual's day job manager, and goals and objectives for the year are spelled out in that contract. And then there's an evaluation against the ERG specific performance. So it becomes, you know, really codified and part of that performance management process to address some of the concerns you raised, like, oh, you're spending all this time on that. Well, here's the written permission to do so.
Yeah, and again, if it's unwritten, then it's not addressed properly, right? So there's always surprises if that's not really laid out well in advance. You know, one of the other things when I talk about talent management, right, that performance component is really key. And a lot of organizations do this thing, and maybe some of you have heard this in your organizations. It's so hard to find minority talent, as an example, right? We can't find qualified talent. Well, you do, but then basically once they're in, they get killed. I mean that in a lighthearted way, right? And what I mean by that, once they're in the funnel, because you know most organizations are a pyramid, right? And so you can get a lot of people at the entry level, mid-management level to come in of diverse backgrounds, but as they go through that pyramid, they drop off. Either they leave because they haven't been addressed in terms of their capabilities, their contributions. I see some heads nodding too. This is sort of fun. And because of that, you know, one of the things that I recommend is that you got to change the dynamic somewhat, right? we had and I'll use Motorola, this is back, at least 15 years ago, a very structured performance management process. It was basically the GE model, and we did it by grade structure. Everybody has some grades or levels. And what that does is it's great because you can have conversations about people, their talents, their contributions, but then it stops. And where it stops is that feeder pool, I call it the feeder pool, of that big chunk of people that you spend a lot of time and effort to bring into the organization, but they never make it up. So I worked a deal with my in-business partner, who was the senior vice president of strategy and marketing. And what we did, I said, we're going to spend of our 8 hour in this performance management discussion with all the levels and all the people, we're going to take at least 45 minutes to talk about the level that you don't see in this day, which is all the people 3 grades down, and particularly people of diverse backgrounds. That's who we wanted to focus on. What that does, it gives a visibility that these individuals would never have otherwise. And it worked out really well because all of a sudden, the senior leadership in that room realized that they don't know everybody. They don't know everybody's talents and capabilities. And so what this does for people is open some doors and conversations. And then, when you have a leader say, well, I want my team to be involved, and everybody here should be talking to 2 of those people, right? All of a sudden you have a pool, right? And so you're pulling people into the discussion, and you're pulling the right people because those are the people who get noticed. They're part of the bigger subset, right? So I see a lot of heads nodding, so this is probably resonating with a lot of you. And I got to tell you, the beauty of it is that, within the next year, we saw a couple double grade promotions, only because these people were so buried. They would have never gotten the sunlight had we not done that. And then all of a sudden, we didn't have that problem that we don't have any talented people in the higher ranks. Well, we do. And we have a feeder pool, and it's working if we work it, right? Just because you do a good job of bringing talent at the front end, you're going to lose them on the way up if you don't have some of these safeguards, right? And Drew, you just were talking about Drew Moore at your law firm. Can you give us a little bit more about your comment here? That open
so Taunton Coburn is a larger law firm based in St. Louis with a large office in Chicago, and I'm the co-chair of our LGBTQ affinity group. Our affinity group, I think it started just as I started here, so it's probably been active for 4 or 5 years now. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, I think this would model, it's kind of bridging the gap, our experience where we had enough powerful people who were vested in diversity efforts on the upper level management and leadership roles, that some of the things that we needed to put in place, we actually had advocates, but they had their struggles. But the 3 points that I was just chatting about, some of these are beyond our pay grades, but our firm already had a mission and a communicated statement out to the public saying that we believe in diversity. But I think this past year we actually made our diversity and inclusion officer an executive C-suite level position. I don't know many companies that do that. So that kind of helped cement a lot of the avenues that we're discussing now. So it wasn't percolating from the bottom up anymore. We already had a diversity and inclusion professional, but by elevating that, they were able to kind of pull everyone that they'd been working with, in the meantime, up with them. Right. And I had these 2 other positions that are points that were more directly relevant. Like when we're talking about integrating this into the talent management process, the time that you spend to, doing a diversity inclusion efforts in general, we actually have a question as well as a checklist that says we value the time that you spend outside of the firm, in your community or, just participating in inclusion or even talent retention. So tell us what that is. And I think what happens is that people, the ones that we go to, the helpers, quote unquote, they tend to do so much helping. To your point, that they don't necessarily advocate for themselves or really communicate what they do. And that gives them an opportunity to, you ask them what they do, they might draw a blank. And then there's a checklist, do you volunteer? Did you participate in recruitment effort? Do you do this or that? And once you just give some examples, we found that people were doing a lot more and able to communicate a lot more of those efforts, up front. And I think that started this whole incorporation into our review process. That started from the ground up. I think it predated our C-suite elevation. So we were just saying, you're asking us to do all these things outside and then, promote our firm and promote the brand, but we're not getting, I guess, recognition for it. So we should be bringing this up somehow. And then that's how it got incorporated. So our firm already had a commitment to D&I in general, but this was one of the things that we highlighted. We were saying like, you have to value this to the same extent that you're valuing, how well we do our job. If you're, saying that you really appreciate it. And by putting that as a question in our review process, I think it does help highlight people's, I guess, not only achievements, but also the work that they do outside the office that would count for some of these things. Right. I don't want to take up too much more of this.
No. This is exactly what we're talking about. You gave a great example, and you gave this basic little story about a journey that your organization went through, right? Where they now took the DEI chief and put that as part of the C-suite. So there was some iterative steps along the way, right? And again, little guardrails to help people get through it, right? And so once the design was laid out, it became more palatable probably for the senior leadership to say, well, wow, we see a way how this architecture can work for us in terms of making sure we engage our employees, that we walk the talk, and that we're recruiting the right talent. So kudos to your organization, but there's always a lot of work to go through, right? Because part of the journey for a lot of organizations is that they have people on the C-suite or in the C-suite or on those management teams that do the talent management process, and they're not all versed on all the components, right? And so if it's not stated upfront by a senior leader, say, here's what we're doing, here's what you're accountable for, it's not going to happen, right? So once you put that in writing, once that's been approved within your organization and people have a template that they can fill out, it's basically your talent profile, right? And this is what's going to really help not only drive performance successes within the organization and get people in ERGs more visibility and opportunities, it will help draw people from outside because they see it working. Okay, a lot of organizations talk that they want change and they want different talents and perspectives, but they just miss the gap of being able to bridge that because one hand doesn't know what the other one's doing. So having that formal architecture in place pays dividend. And let's face it, it's all data driven, right? Performance is data driven. No matter if you say there's a word of excellent, superior, or whatever, there is a number attached to those rankings, okay? And so when you're making decisions for salary treatment or different types of benefit, it's all about the numbers. So having somebody in your ERG who's good with statistical and data-driven activities is key to getting your organization really noticed. So if that's open to you, that's something that you may want to look into, right? Anybody else have a couple ideas or share best practices from your organization or questions for me or the other participants? Okay, I gave the one example of the Motorola of expanding the dialogue around people outside the structure of the bands that were considered to be next generation, right? What that did, again, if your ERG does not have that sponsorship and leadership internally to help drive some of these discussions, it's not going to be as fruitful for your participants. So really, in your ERG, your charter has probably some statements that you abide by, but making sure that there's a architecture or at least a plan to get involvement and sponsorship of some of these activities, because that's the only way you're going to show value within the organization. Just showing a number of participants and an increase in your group does not translate to success for the organization necessarily, right? I'm being sort of blunt about that, but I've been around enough times with different organizations where, again, they say the right things, but at the end of the day, and I remember succinctly, there was a woman who joined the Pride group, and she was just devastated because she said, I put all this time and effort into helping this organization and making the company look good at all these national conventions, and really spent my time away from weekends, and I got rated just like average. And I'm like, well, what's the expectation? What were the measurements, right? And so a lot of times up front, let's have that dialogue way before that performance measurement time. Otherwise, you're going to be, in some cases, very disappointed, right? And so maybe, Lisa, is there something that was an aha moment for your organization in terms of your structure when you started doing these activities?
I'll say that we actually had a charter for our employee resource groups at the time they were created. So that I think helped. The Nature Conservancy created about 4 of our employee resource groups at the same time. Initially, there was one for women, a multicultural group, Nature's Pride, which is our LGBTQ plus group, and there was a group for young and emerging professionals. So there was somewhat of a baseline for all of those groups. It wasn't like they were trying to figure it out completely on their own. Codifying the role of the executive sponsor and setting those expectations in writing as well is really important. I know you mentioned meeting at least quarterly with them if possible. I think that's great. And a lot of, in my experience, executive sponsors, their heart's in the right place, but they don't really know what to do and what they're getting into, what time commitment is required, etc. So really spelling out those expectations as you're having that conversation about whether they're even the right fit for the executive sponsor can be really helpful. We also do have some mechanisms for training of our ERG staff internally, as well as mechanisms for collaboration across employee resource groups, whether that's on things like book clubs or mentorship or shared materials that can be used at recruitment fairs, things of that nature. The exact topics of that collaboration vary depending on where the groups are at in their maturity and what their focus is at any given time. But having that platform for sharing lessons learned, even within the organization from different group leaders, can be helpful. We have 7 or 8 employee resource groups currently for a whole range of topics.
Right. And thank you for sharing that. That's good overview and insight. I mentioned this whole thing about having a statement from the organization at the leadership level. So it's the chairman saying this is sort of our how we want to be perceived, how we're going to work with different groups and experiences, but saying that and then operationalizing is, again, 2 different things. So don't be afraid to call it out in a diplomatic way, right? Because a lot of times, again, the numbers make the difference. Until it's embedded in somebody's performance, it doesn't get measured. So I will tell you, probably a best practice in a performance management for leadership, especially at the C-suite, is that they have to meet with 4 different leaders a quarter. So it's measured, right? And if they don't, they're going to get 5% off of their bonus, right? So what that does, it drives behavior and it drives the conversation so that people are engaged. A lot of times, just like any type of conversation, some people are uncomfortable having conversations. And a lot of the leaders, believe it or not, are very uncomfortable because they're not familiar with this ERG or some of the people they haven't interfaced with before, and they're very uncomfortable. So that conversation, they need a little coaching. So don't be afraid to go to your HR, your business HR person, or your talent development person and say, hey, does this person know what's the expectation is for this discussion? Because I'm going to be meeting with her in another week. And I want to make sure it's just not a flat discussion. It's all me talking. So is there some talking points? Is there a checklist of things I should be bringing up? Again, it's coaching for performance on both sides. Make sense? And Drew, anything, aha moment for your organization?
So, I mean, it's a law firm, so we are full of a lot of very critical thinkers. So I think that piece you mentioned before about actually matching it with numbers and, you know, trying to make the case on, I guess, the data, the quantitative side was very helpful, but we were really patient in going with steps, you know. So the first step was getting that firm commitment. Once that commitment's out there, whether it's communicated internally or externally, it makes it a little bit easier to get to the next step, because now you're saying, well, we put out this public statement, so now we have to back it up. And then when we start, you know, doing things like expanding recruitment activities or whatever, that generates more numbers and it generates a little bit more data. So what we were doing was, and I think there are a couple of books out there. I think the Equality Institute, Estrada Smith released the book, and there are other consulting companies who are in that space already, but they're saying you have to be really patient and really take, I think that one major resource is called SMART goals. I'm not sure how many people have heard of that. And it incorporates a lot of what you're talking about. It's like, you don't try to do everything at once. You're not trying to get that C-suite position. If you're just starting the organization or your group, you're really starting to say like, well, what is our organization willing to do? You know, if your organization is not willing to, you know, release a public statement, you know, you can't necessarily just leave your job and, you know, and just get frustrated. You have to work within the structure that's there. I mean, it is progress to have them release an internal statement. It is progress to get a meeting with the head of HR. It is progress to have that meeting lead to at least diversity awareness announcements on your intranet. So it's almost like being patient, having very concrete steps at each, you know, phase. And then every time you accomplish that step, you have to have someone in the organization that's actually able to take that and magnify it up to leadership. You know, the person who's able to write that email and say, we had these events, these were all employee-led, employee-driven events. They generated this amount of value, and just do it a presentation or even like a bullet point email or, you know, what have you, or a big meeting. So it's really about patience, and it's really saying you're not going to, you know, get everything you want up front. Just figure out what your organization and what you have the capacity to do. And I think a big part of that is mentorship. We're talking about getting sponsors. And I think, you know, to a certain extent, you want someone who's going to be strategic, go for a sponsor who's going to help your career. But then you start communicating to that sponsor. I come from a diverse background, and I want to make this organization a better place for other people coming up behind me. And, you know, if you use your organization's internal resources correctly, especially if there's an existing mentorship type community or program, then you have the capacity to kind of push that forward, because they might not be getting that message through traditional channels. So a lot of this is very strategic, and it's very much like, okay, so I still have to look out for my position here, but how can I use this position to not only show my future leadership and value, but kind of communicate that we have to take steps to make it easier.
Bring others with you. Bring others with you. You know, so, you know, when you're talking about that, Drew, and I think a lot of you on this call, this conference will sort of resonate with this. I would say it's not a race, it's a marathon, right? And because it's change management at its most human aspect of it, right? Change doesn't come fast all the time, because it's really, like you said, Drew, it's baby steps a little bit, right? It's like, you know, people don't all take information the same way. So you got to work with different people, different levels, in different ways to get the message across and let them feel safe and secure about asking questions. And a lot of times what works best is, you know, the Q&As, you know, FAQs, just because it sets the stage for people. So, you know, I think best practice, and you'll see this with a lot of organizations at ERGs, they do have FAQs. You know, what's your group? How do I get involved? Who's it open to? What's the requirement for a manager to be a sponsor, right? Because if that's something that they're pushing within the organization to do a better branding job, then you better have the facts and data ready for these people who want to help you and want to see it go further. So best practice. And you know what, I'm doing a little commercial here for Bernadette Smith. I don't know if you can all see this book, but she just came out with it, and some of the things in here would help many people on this call. Simple things, doable, actionable things that can really add an impact and value to the organization. So I recommend her book, Inclusive 360. Any other comments as we go through this? This is great discussion, though. Thank you so much. Adam, you had some initial ones. Do you have anything else to add?
No, this is really helpful. Our PRGs or ERGs are generally about 2 to 3 years old. So, and then going through the pandemic, of course, which has actually had some silver linings now because we've been able to sort of virtually connect to other states and areas that we're in. But kind of hearing what you're talking about, we can think about how to pull that in to where we're at to formalize more of these structures and engage with our executive committee. So this is, yeah, great information.
Yeah, you know, and one of my other clients is a small manufacturing firm, but they've been very successful. It doesn't hurt that leadership is gay, but it's not all gay, and every leader on the leadership team doesn't always have the same view. But again, it's about the structure and about the commitment and the requirements, right? And so being able to measure that is very powerful on a quarterly and annual basis. The data does not lie. So we're not going to be able to be a better organization if we're not doing the outreach, if we're not coaching and counseling our employees. And it's not just within the group. The best way to do that is to get different perspectives to make us better, right? So if I'm in a finance function, I don't need to talk to the CFO because they probably already know who I am in a smaller organization and what I do. But maybe having exposure to the VP of manufacturing, because now all of a sudden I'm bringing some additional value and perspective that they didn't have originally. And that's really where you incubate the ideas of how to get the better organization, better results, right? Because at the end of the day, you know, it's about our brand and how we're marketing and how we're selling and what our clients say, right? That's how you get your bonuses. That's how we're getting our paycheck. So, you know, sometimes, again, it gets to that point early on in ERGs. A lot of people are so enthusiastic because they're part of an ERG and it's the first one out of college or school or whatever. And they just go full force, but fail to realize that a lot of that effort is not going to be recognized or rewarded. So having that reward structure in place, having that charter, call it out like they do at the conservative, right? I mean, you call out how you're going to measure, and it makes everybody better because everybody has an understanding and appreciation for what's going to be coming down the line, right? Any other best practices or inputs or questions for anybody here on the call?
John, we did get I don't know if you saw this question from Beverly a little while ago. I know you kind of just pointed out the.
You know it. Genevieve.
But she
Genevieve. She can't stop looking at you.
asked about what resources are available to assist with formalizing a program, if you know of any other options.
Yeah, well, I gave, and thank you for sharing the link for Bernadette's book. I mean, those are real tried and true activities and processes that you can easily pull out of a book that she wrote and maybe alter it for your organization. And some of the other resources are conferences like this, because nothing's static, everything changes, right? And so being able to draw from these conferences is real-time information. Particularly in the last 2 years, you know, somebody mentioned pandemic activities. The way we work the new normal is far different, and you've got to be able to address that. And so real-time information is critical to make sure that you're doing the right things for the organization to support those goals and objectives, right? So that's a short answer for there's a lot out there. You just have to pick and choose what might work. And having those conversations, the resource right now, all these people on this call, because you have an interest in it, you either participate, you wanted to, it's a great forum and connection and network for people to find out more, right? Because some of the things we talked about, there may be somebody on the call who says, yeah, we tried that, it didn't work. Or we tried something similar and we tweaked it to make it work for us, right? So, getting the validation or making sure that you're getting the full detail of how success looks for that organization, how you might take that to yours. So in a roundabout way, Jeremy, that's an answer. Any other inputs from people?
This is I just have a quick question.
Yep.
In regards to getting the data piece of the LGBTQ plus employees, I know my company, the HR has that locked and we're not really collecting that information. So that's something that we do want to have a little bit more insight in regards to our population and ensuring that we have some policies for our transgender associates and moving forward. How would you recommend or maybe a best practice to start like creating kind of a proposal and kind of the benefits for capturing this information?
Yeah, I think it's twofold, Constantine. Thank you for that question. One is that from an HR perspective, the confidential self-identification is confidential, right? There's no way around that. The way to work it, though, is to make sure that your ERG has the communication pieces out there to make it comfortable for people to contact you, as an example, to say, we're not going to be able to get this information other than from you. So do you want to self-identify? Is there a way I can help you? Is there another organization I can help link you to, right? So you are the resource, right? The other one is work with some of your leadership to say, here's something that we see as a bottleneck. We can't get all the data from HR because it's confidential. These are business leaders who've been challenged with different business problems. Treat this the same way. What's in their knowledge base and the way they've been successful? How can we tackle this one? We need your help, right? You need a sponsor. You need somebody to work this through the rest of the leadership team to make sure that everybody's maybe on the same page too, right? Yeah. Because with numbers, there's power, right?
So I will say, in collecting data and analyzing it at Walgreens, we've had a struggle with getting that private information in general, because we have such a response from allies in our attendance with the different events that we do, the different tutorials that we have, which is really great. So we see sometimes over half of our attendance as allies, and there's not a real way to gauge that other than just to appreciate that there's that real interest in supporting the community. And so we do measure our KPIs from just general attendance, but we can't say that this demographic, or this number represents a certain demographic. Kind of
right. But you know what? And I think to your point, Jacob, having allies is key. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's really, you're getting the communication out there.
And with cross-sectionality being so important, and really ensuring that everyone, we get that message out for everyone, collaborating with other BRGs and making sure that everyone has the opportunity and that we're inclusive, so that those allies we do communicate that they're really welcome and that we appreciate them, joining and being part of everything that we offer is so important.
Yeah, perfect. That's a great example and insight to what's happening in the marketplace. The one thing I want to mention is accessibility. I work with Abler, which is out in North Carolina, and of course this is October is Disability Workplace Month, and so one of the things I would like to leave everybody with as we sort of ramp down is that accessibility is going to be one of those key areas that impacts every ERG, because some of your members are part of that group already. So how are you attracting and being able to help support somebody with disabilities in your ERG, right? And there is no black and white answer. It's a continuum of effort, okay? And one of the facts that John Samuel, who's the CEO of Abler, put out there was right now there are 60 million Americans workers that have a disability, a variety of them. Within the next 10 years, there will be 120 million because of the aging population, right? So how does your organization tap into that power? Because there is power there, whether it's buying power, whether it's manpower, there's power there. And how do you tap into it from an accessibility perspective? Anybody else? We're coming up, we have a couple more minutes, Jeremy, is this what? Yeah. One of the other things I will say, and please jump in, I'm just a talking head at this point, but can't stress enough the data, right? Can't stress enough making sure that you have agreement on what's being measured, right? And getting that senior leadership sponsorship and active participation. I've been part of facilitating a lot of executive training, leadership, VP, councils, whatever, different organizations. And it so happens where you have the chairman come in to do a kickoff and then he leaves. He goes, how important this is that you're all here, how important it is that you're participating, that the company's investing all this money in you because we have this 2-day event for this leadership team. And then he walks out, and typically a he, sorry. And so, and what that does is like, well, if it was that important, you would be here taking this, right? Or you would be here championing it. You would be doing something different. So getting consensus and buy-in is key as well. And that data that you're collecting with your team in terms of how many events you go to, how many people you've touched about your organization, I would say, collect as much data, and then as a team, you want to figure out what are the tidbits, what are the bites of information that we can help either on our talent management side, our branding, our marketing side, right? Because all these things link into each other, okay? And it's all about the data. And I think Jacob probably at Walgreens, right? Isn't it all about the data? You're on mute. I think you're on mute. Uh-oh.
Sorry about that. That's the story of my life. Yes, everything is so data driven, 100%. So, in any statement, we always have to be prepared with those numbers to back it up.
Right. And as we go into this next era post-pandemic, right? And I don't know if it's ever going to be post-pandemic, truly, but as we go into it, a lot of lessons learned from a lot of organizations, particularly, it could be legal, it could be facilities, it could be transportation, infrastructure, whatever it is, but the workforce is changing. And so our ERGs, the way they appear now, may look a little different in 5 years from now, right? And what are you doing to say, how do we migrate to be more successful and address everyone's needs? So, having that, if it's an annual thing, but making sure you had those conversations about our charter and how do we tweak it based on what's happening in the market and in your workplace. Those are key things. And again, working with your HR leadership to say, we're here to participate fully, and we add value because we track, we have data points, we want to be better, we want to coach people, we want to get them through the organization. And so having that agreement with them that you're an ally and an asset for the organization. So I think we're right at time. Is that right, Jeremy?
I think we got a couple more minutes. I did see we had a final question from Lotus, perhaps.
Yeah, so thank you, John. Lotus, they, them, she, her. I'm also from Oak Street with Adam. And I do resonate a lot with this trying to get leadership's engagement through data. But I think like another power source is, people at the front lines of whatever company you're working for. with us, it could be with us, it's like our care teams, our providers, our scribes, our nurses. And while it's required for, leadership to buy into whatever any LGBT ERG is doing, I think it's also like the communication to the broader company, especially if you have a company where there's, many different people on the front lines who are trying to enact any kind of diversity inclusion initiatives that you're going for. And I find personally that it's not just data that convinces these people to join, but storytelling and telling stories of other ERGs that have done things to make not just like the internal environment of your company or corporation more inclusive, but also anything you output, any products that you make, any services that you provide should also be inclusive towards, multiculturalism or any kind of LGBT folks. Like for healthcare, of course, you can imagine that's particularly important. And I think I would also just love to hear any of your stories as to how you were able to convince people on the front lines to maybe adopt any kind of policies or attitudes or changes in behavior, and how you were able to, I guess, promote that change from within. Because I think while leadership is also important, it's very important to convince them for anything that we're doing. I also think it's, the people who are doing the work that have a lot of power as well.
The front line you're talking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, good, thank you. Any inputs from anybody? I mean, this is a very powerful statement the way you laid it out, because there's activity happening, but can people call it out? One of the things I would say right away until somebody chimes in is that that front line interface is so key, because it's with you provide a service, but you're also working with vendors, right? And so how does that impact your vendor group? And I'll use one scenario when we talk about government contractors, right? Now, government contracting with healthcare service or whatever service or supplies or whatever, there's certain requirements along the way. And it's a matter of interpretation on how that's being addressed. So some people say, well, that doesn't apply to us. Well, you know what? If you're doing an audit on how you operate, the one thing they're going to look at in most cases is that how do you manage talent? How do you recruit? What is your selection process? Because that's all part of that overview. And to have partnerships along the way and be able to Lotus to call them out to say, here's how we work against the continuum, not only of our clients that are getting the care, but also our vendors who supply for us. So you have a great, powerful story if you can capture that. Again, it goes back to the data, right? And how do you capture? Anybody else?
Yeah, I'll say we've had the great opportunity to collaborate with some of our vendors on Pride type of products going into the stores and provide feedback and work on the product development when it came to certain merchandise. And it's made a big difference where I think that a lot of times a lot of our vendors were rubber stamping things with what they thought were geared towards our community, and it wasn't necessarily something that was appropriate, or there was a better way of stating things. And we've seen that they've made those corrections and changes, and so to have that influence has been great. And again, just to speak to expressing the value in our team members on the front lines, that's where the buck stops. They're representing our company, and this coming year our main focus is ensuring that their voices are heard, and that we're doing everything that we can to incorporate them into different PRG chapters that we're opening and feeling inclusive.
Lotus, that might be some good input for you, right?
Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate that. I feel like one of the things I'm going to be curious about or talking about in later sessions is how to address some of the criticism or pushback that you get. One of the things I've been toying around with in my head is the fact that some people just whenever there's any suggestion of like movement and LGBT inclusion for frontline products or for leadership, I feel like people are misunderstanding like what our vision is. What is our cultural vision? Like, what do we want the world to be like? What do we want our company to be like? How does our company interact with the broader community? And how to communicate that vision with people so they're not so scared of everything that we're doing. You know, people are genuinely like, oh, if I don't use your pronouns, you're going to fire me, or like, you know, people are genuinely like, this is what their concerns are, because I don't think we properly communicate that vision. And I feel like through storytelling, there's maybe a possibility of doing that. So anyway, I'm curious to learn more later on in this conference. Thank you.
You know, I think we're right at time almost, but I have one last thing to say. Thank you, Lotus, because I think that was very powerful. Feedback is the breakfast of champions. Just remember that, right? Because negative feedback always hurts, but the thing is, you're never going to get any better if you don't sort of listen and act on it, right? Early in my career, I remember being very hurt for a couple of things, but it was not to make me feel bad. It was making me better. But it's about perspective. So with that, Jeremy, I think I'll hand it over to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you all for really being interactive and sharing some best practices and asking questions and really being engaged. That always really helps to make a session much more impactful and exciting. So just very quickly, Drew, I'll give you a chance to just very quickly talk about the upcoming Citywide Pride event. I know someone asked about resources for formalizing your ERG, and so I think Citywide Pride and their next event might be a good option. So Drew, if you want to close us out with a quick overview of that would be helpful.
All right, I'm not going to take up too much time, but yeah, I'm on the Leadership Council of Citywide Pride. I'm not sure how many of y'all have gone to Citywide Pride events or have even signed up for the mailing list, but you know, it's really a group oriented around creating networking opportunities for LGBTQ professionals all around Chicago. So we work with the Chamber of Commerce on a number of events, and you know, we're also partnered with the Equality Institute. So you might not have seen Citywide Pride, but you've probably seen one of our allies out there. And next week, November 3rd, we're having a very informal meet and greet. It's going to be an opportunity to kind of let's say de-stress and share some of our experience over the last year or so. So this is a come as you are session. It's kind of planned to start at 4:30. So it's early enough that you get to leave work for a good reason. But it's also, you know, at a good time where it won't drain your entire night. We're planning a couple of breakout sessions, and we're going to modify that based upon the number of people coming. But it's really going to be oriented around some of the things that we haven't discussed yet or are looming in the background. You know, continued engagement, really setting your next milestone or like you know, mission priorities for the next upcoming year. And a lot of the conversations we have are very similar to what we were just discussing. You know, goal setting, trying to figure out how to maximize your position in these firms, not only for your career, but you know, to just be a better person and you know, expand D&I in your organization and you know, create new opportunities. So going to be fun. Come as you are again. And if you have any questions, let me know. And Jeremy was so on top of it, he immediately found the link that I was like digging through my Outlook for. So if you want to register, please do. And yeah, that's it. If you have any questions, just let me know.
Perfect. Thanks, Drew. Well, huge thank you, Jim, for really sharing some really great insight and definitely some things that I hadn't even really thought about in terms of this topic. So thank you again for all of your smartness and all your.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
So everyone, we've got a break. We'll see you at 11:15 for our trans inclusion Q&A chat. So see you in a bit, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.